Welcome to Formula One and Son. I'm Tom.
And I'm Oscar.
Well, Oscar, we come off the back end of the Monaco Grand Prix. Always much anticipated and the kind of jewel in the crown of Formula One. But frankly, quite often a procession and fairly boring, particularly after qualifying on Saturday.
But not this time.
But not this time. I would go as far to say that it's probably the most exciting race that we've had since Bahrain. What do you think?
I think I would agree. For once, I wasn't bored and then just doing something completely different.
That's true. That's true.
Watching you suffer by watching the race.
Yeah.
But it doesn't beat Bahrain, obviously.
No,
but
that was an exciting race.
On earlier or later, no, not completely sure. Pay my respects to Niki Lauda, who had just passed away of natural causes.
Yeah, it's a real tragedy. Obviously, it had that lung transplant, I think, early in the year or maybe late last year. From all reports, it sounded like he was recovering from that, but obviously, it got the better of him. Yeah, he tragically passed away during the week. Lots of lovely tributes throughout the grid. Mercedes had that red halo and the star on the car.
Almost everyone was wearing his famous red cap.
Yeah, everyone had that red cap, which never looked good on Nicky. It didn't look good on anyone else, I thought, but it was a really touching tribute.
Yeah.
And a tough way. And actually, Lewis Hamilton was obviously quite affected. He got excused from doing kind of media duties, on the Wednesday or Thursday. Yeah, because I think Nicky had quite a bit to do with bringing Lewis over to Mercedes, and I think they had a pretty good relationship. And obviously, Nicky being at least three-time world champion, I think. Yeah. He understood the drive as well, and I think was able to have a good relationship. And
he did survive his crash, his infamous crash.
Yeah, those burns which you could see on him, and
he raced. like 40 days after that crash.
Yeah, no, it's one of the great comeback stories of Formula One. So, yeah, real loss. And, shame not to have him around. I always enjoyed him being interviewed. You know, he kind of told it the way it was and made it interesting. So, but we came into the Monaco weekend, of course, on the back of Mercedes winning 1-2s in every race so far, and absolutely dominating. High expectations that something different might happen. And then we got into...
wait, can I just interrupt you for a second? Just out of curiosity, because we have F1 TV, I started watching the Canadian 2014 Grand Prix. So in that Grand Prix, they had been on a large chain of 1-2s, Mercedes.
Yeah, that's right.
But not from the first Grand Prix, but from the rest of the Grand Prix. It was a Canadian Grand Prix. And if they had gotten a 1-2 on that Grand Prix, they would have 6 in a row.
Right.
And
that would have been the record, right?
The record. Mm. But they didn't. And the same thing happened in Monaco.
So they've had 5 1-2s. So does that remain the record, does it? 5 1-2s in a row?
No, 6 1-2s in a row is the record.
Oh, okay.
Or
probably 5.
I don't know. But they did beat the record of most 1-2s from the start of the season. Though.
That's right. So we came into the Monaco weekend expecting Mercedes to dominate. And throughout the practice sessions, they were looking really strong. But towards the end of, I think, FP3, Charles Leclerc, the hometown legend and the new hope,
had a tussle.
He was looking really strong, and we thought, come qualifying, it was going to be really exciting. We were going to see maybe Ferrari snatch a pole away. Yeah. We get into the first stage of qualifying, Q1 as they call it,
and they don't bring Leclerc out because Ferrari, not the smartest team in the world, and then out of Q1.
Yeah, it was a real shame. They misjudged. They sat there and said, "Okay, we think we're safe with his first run and the time there," and didn't bring him out again in order to save tyres for later.
He wasn't that high up. He was on 10th or something.
Yeah, I can't quite recall how far up he was, but you could probably. I can't remember at the time, but they decided they wanted to save tyres, so they tried to save tyres, and he got pipped and. I guess in a piece of irony, he got pipped by Sebastian Vettel right at the end, who was also looking in danger, and I think had nudged the walls a few times. And
but he was kind of scrappy.
Yeah, it was scrappy for Ferrari,
and he ended up in 4th.
Yeah,
he qualified 4th. It's not too great, but it's okay. He got out-qualified by Verstappen, though, which is
Yeah,
probably adding insult to injury for Ferrari there.
That's right. And so out of Q1, of course, the Williams were out of Q1. We'll get into the Williams a little bit later. Probably their best weekend of the year so far, we'll come back to that.
Even though their qualifying was still
their qualifying was still there. George Russell, again, our qualifying Kubica. And then the Force India's Racing Points. When am
Racing
I going to
Racing Points.
Oscar, I'm glad to see that even when we watch the Formula One, most people still call them Force India. You see it all the time. So really sad. Both of the Alphas made it through, and everyone else. But the Alphas after that, they were looking pretty average.
Well, actually, it's interesting. So let's just forget about Leclerc for a minute and pretend he got pole. Well, let's not do that because he didn't. But let's just forget about him. So the bottom, bottom 6 people were all teams, actually. All in pairs of teams. Yeah, it was the Williams, and then in front of them, the Racing Points, and then in front of them, the Alphas.
Yeah, and that's not surprising. I mean, if the drivers are both performing at some level of potential, then you'd expect them to be together. Actually, what was interesting in Q2 is Giovinazzi was out-qualified by Raikkonen, I think, yet again. I think he's been out-qualified by Raikkonen, but only by a smidge, less than a tenth of a second. So it was good to see he had some pace.
Both qualifyings. The first qualifying... it was by 200.
Yeah, they were within thousandths of each other, weren't they?
The second one, it was...
So then throughout qualifying, then when we got into Q2, we had seen that the Toro Rossos looked pretty strong all weekend, but Albon just squeaked in and, in fact, knocked Nico Hülkenberg out. And we saw our man, Danny Ricciardo, do particularly in Q3, but some cracker of laps. And, of course, he was the winner in Monaco last year. He loves the track. But they had been looking slow, the Renaults, throughout most of the practice sessions.
I think they were sandbagging.
Well, no, you don't sandbag when you're an also-ran team. And you certainly don't sandbag through. You need to build your rhythm in Monaco, and you need to be building up and certainly not going flat out on the first lap. You need to build up your confidence, but they weren't sandbagging. What we actually saw, Oscar, so let's just take a minute to talk about Renault. I'm not sure I've shared this with you, but it turns out Cyril Abiteboul came out. He's the racing manager. What do they call him?
Team racing director.
No, the team whatever they call
strategist?
Team principal. There you go. He's the team principal for Renault, and he came out last week and actually said they'd been dealing with an issue and had the powers turned down on their engines for pretty much this whole season. So remember how...
What?
So remember
Could've
how...
told me.
Yeah, I'm telling you now. Remember how Hülkenberg had his engine blow up and then Ricciardo stopped 2 seconds after him in China? Where was that?
Yeah, it was Bahrain.
In Bahrain, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's right. So it turned out, obviously, they'd had some MG UK issues that had afflicted Sainz in Australia. It had afflicted Ricciardo in that race. But you remember Hülkenberg's engine went pop. Remember the smoke came out the back?
Yeah, it was a pretty big explosion.
It turns out that they had a fundamental issue with their conrods, which are the...
all the teams and their fundamental issues.
Yeah, well, that's what connects the piston and the crank is the conrod. And they'd identified this and had to develop a new part. And it's unusual too. That's not a simple, but that's a fundamental part of an engine.
Cars?
It was on all the Renault engines, and so they had the power turned down. Yeah, including the McLarens. So they had the power turned down, and it's only just now in Spain they had the fix, and that's why they took new engines in Spain, which was unusual. So they took new engines in Spain, but they
Monaco the new engine day?
Yeah, normally. But remember, a lot of teams did it in Spain, and everyone said, normally you would do it, in Canada, actually, because you don't need power in Monaco, so normally you run until Canada.
And Monaco's the new gearbox day, I think.
Yeah, so anyway, they put the new engines in Spain, but still ran it on low power, and were slowly turning up the power just to make sure everything was good. Yeah. Now it's apparently looking good. They were targeting this year to have an extra 50 kilowatts throughout the year. They've now got an extra 40 kilowatts and still looking for the extra 10. Cyril is saying, now, and Cyril says a lot of things, so we'll take it with a pinch of salt. But
let's just point out that none of us like Cyril.
Oh, he's all
right.
Sure. Okay.
Sorry.
And so he's now saying that they're on par with kind of Mercedes and Ferrari, except in quali. Ferrari have still the best quali engine. Yeah. We'll see. You'll obviously in Monaco, you're not going to see that extra power because it's not a power circuit. Come Canada, the next race, we'll see if that's true. But, we have seen some good performances from the McLarens and from the Renaults. So we'll see later in the season if they're really going to perform at that high level. Okay. That was an aside. Sorry, long story.
Start talking about Canada. I don't think we've talked about the race
yet.
Well,
let's round up quali. So Q3 comes along.
Wait, can I do a better roundup? Williams, slow. Mercedes, fast. Max Verstappen, also looking fast. Ferraris, slow.
Ferrari shooting themselves in the foot as per usual.
More or less.
So probably the highlight of qualifying, though, Valtteri Bottas, looking on it all weekend, frankly, once again, looked like he'd secure pole in the first runs in Q3, had quite the gap. Lewis comes out and does a bit of a Lewis. We haven't seen this for a little while, though, where Lewis just brings it all together. And you could see the joy in his face afterwards. And I don't know if that was because, kind of honouring Nicky or just beating Bottas, because Bottas has out-qualified him. So the last 3 races, Bottas has been on pole, right?
Yeah.
So I think he wanted that momentum back and ended up just pipping Valtteri by, I think, less than a tenth. So Valtteri's still very much on it. And you could see Valtteri was disappointed. But as you say, then Max Verstappen, then Vettel, and probably one of my highlights of qualifying, and just pipped at the end. But Ricciardo put it up into 6th. And did a absolute cracker of a lap.
But then Magnussen did an even better lap. And
then Magnussen just pipped him. And, frankly, Magnussen was looking fast all weekend as well.
No, Ricciardo wasn't.
One other thing out of qualifying that was relevant was that Grosjean got horribly bopped by Pierre Gasly at one point. And as a result of that, Gasly, who actually qualified 5th on track, got a 3-place grid penalty. And that was important because that promoted Magnussen, Ricciardo, and Kvyat. I was just say the
penalties really helped Ricciardo this weekend.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Well, it helped him.
Yeah, it didn't hurt. But later on, we'll talk about that. So, a pretty interesting qualifying. And it's set up for an interesting race because we like it when you've got a fast car at the back. Remember last year, Verstappen was right at the back. He was about the only guy overtaking.
10th in the end? 8th?
Yeah, he did well, didn't he? I think he got a point. And he was the only guy overtaking. And this year we thought, okay, well, poor old Leclerc, who for the first time when you saw him get out of his car, genuinely looked really frustrated, let's put it politely, with his team, to say the least. And yet they just misjudged it. So we were set up for a great race. And let's get into the race then. What happened at the start?
Leclerc crashed.
Leclerc crashed? Leclerc didn't crash at the start. That was ages in.
That's the highlight.
That's the highlight.
Ricciardo gets Magnussen. Okay. And then Leclerc crashed.
And Leclerc didn't crash.
Yeah, he did.
Did he now? Okay, let's actually talk about this from the beginning. So the start was pretty clean by the front 2 runners. Verstappen looked like he was going to get overtaken, but he managed to hold his position.
And
but a little bit further back, Ricciardo got Magnussen. Yeah, Ricciardo got Magnussen, which was great.
Leclerc got 2 people off the start as well.
Leclerc had a flyer of a start. In the opening laps, it was kind of hold stations, except at the back. Actually, Sainz did some fantastic overtakes up the hill towards Casino Square, which is called whatever they call that section there, which we should know. That's the thing about Monaco. You're supposed to know all the groovy names for the turns.
All the French names.
All the French names. So he's going up Beau Rivage. Is that it? That doesn't say right.
It's one of the turns.
Going up Beau Rivage to Casino Square. Sainz did a crazy overtake around the outside. And frankly, had a great weekend in many ways.
It was luck.
Well, I want to reflect on that in a little bit. But in the background, you've got old mate Charles Leclerc having a crack at everyone and doing some risky overtakes. And he had said the day before, he basically said, I'm either going to win it or bin it. Yeah, exactly. It was like, I'm going to have to take risks of crashing if I'm going to get anything out of this.
The team seemed relatively okay with that.
And they kind of said, yeah, fair enough. And he certainly drove like that. And one could say maybe a bit too angrily. But initially, he did some good overtakes up the inside coming into the Rascasse.
Yes.
But then eventually tried to pull that trick on Nico Hulkenberg, I think it was. He did it on Grosjean.
Oh, and just for all of those people that don't know the corners, the Rascasse is the second to last corner.
Yeah, that's right. It's kind of just
that's
before
sort of
the
last
pits.
Section, just before. It's sort of like almost a hairpin.
It's all like you do a right and then kind of another right, don't you, onto the straight. And in between those two is the pit entry.
Either way.
Yeah, and it's one of the very few overtaking zones, but it's a really risky one. The other one is into the Nouveau chicane, which is the chicane at the bottom of the hill after you come out of the
chicane?
Nouveau, as in new chicane. And then there's another one there. And so up comes Leclerc up the inside of Hulkenberg after having done the same move successfully to Grosjean, although Grosjean almost ran into him. He does run into Hulkenberg, cops a puncture. Actually, he didn't really run into Hulkenberg initially. Actually, with his rear tyre, hit the barrier.
Yeah.
And that kind of spun him around. He caught a puncture.
He kind of spun around but recovered from it straight away as well, though.
Yeah, but caught a puncture and then drove around basically the whole course.
And then damaged his floor.
With his tyre delaminating and just killing his floor.
And then there was a safety car.
And because of all the debris,
there was a safety car. And he crashed. You said he didn't crash. He crashed.
When did he crash?
Into the barrier. That's a crash. Dead.
Did he? Okay. And then what happened is that safety car was the thing that changed the shape of the race for many, many people. So the front runners, the first four front runners, at this point, by the way, we're talking about lap 10 or 11, aren't we, here?
They all pitted,
when this comes in. And
they all pitted.
At around lap 10 or 11, what we see is at that point, the front runners had run off into the distance. So the first four cars.
Yeah, Ricciardo was really making a gap to them.
Yeah, Ricciardo was really having a gap. I don't know if that was a pace issue or just he I think said he knew he wasn't going to race those guys in front of him.
Yeah.
And he was racing the guys behind him, so was managing his tyres. And let's face it, he did pretty much a whole race last year without an MG UK, so 160 horsepower, and didn't get overtaken.
So anyway, they were far enough ahead, they all pit, didn't they?
So the first four all pit, and pretty much pit and get out in front of everyone else.
Yeah.
Ricciardo and Magnussen decide to pit as well, and that ruined their race. They end up with pitting, but no one else behind them effectively pit in that window, and that means they fell all the way back, and that promoted up the likes of Sainz, Kvyat, Gasly, and a bunch of other people.
And then Lando Norris
and Kimi Räikkönen,
Well, Lando Norris first. Lando Norris started driving about as slow as a Williams. And
hey, the Williams were on the tail of everyone at this point.
Sure. He started driving very slowly.
Yeah.
Very slowly.
Yeah.
And then at the end, when everyone actually started pinning, there was a 44-second gap between the people in front.
Now,
of
Lando did that deliberately. Yeah, this was a McLaren strategy to promote Sainz. So Sainz was at the front, and they knew if Lando held everyone else back, that Sainz could pit and then come out in front of Lando and Raikkonen. And when did they say this? Hey, they said it after the race. It was a deliberate strategy. So then of course, Magnussen and Ricciardo come out behind the pack then because they've pitted now onto the mediums for Ricciardo, onto the hards for Magnussen. Now, in that first round of pit stops, the other critical thing that really shaped the race was that Hamilton went on to the mediums. Now, at that point, Verstappen and Vettel
were on hards.
And Bottas come in. Yeah, but Red Bull do a super fast pit stop and release Verstappen. But
Bottas is there.
Into the side of Bottas. So Verstappen basically drives Bottas into a wall. Bottas gets a puncture or a slow leak. So he would have come out...
And a tiny bit of floor damage.
Yeah. So basically, Verstappen's jumped himself up into second place. He's on the hard tyres. And Bottas, they come around again, and Bottas pits again and then goes onto the hard tyres. So suddenly you've got Lewis Hamilton leading on mediums, Verstappen behind him on hards, Vettel behind him on hards, Bottas behind him now on hards as well. And away we go. And in something that we haven't seen for a while... and I'd like your opinion on this, Oscar. Now, for basically the rest of the race, Lewis Hamilton is complaining on the radio saying, I'm never going to get these tyres to the end. I'm never going to get these tyres to the end.
That is what happened.
Is that true?
Yes.
Is that what he thinks? Or is he just...
I don't think that's what he thought.
Why do you reckon he sits there doing that?
To make the other teams excited and then crush their hopes.
Yeah, I think you could be right. Here's my kind of pet theory, and this is probably a bit uncharitable.
Wait, before you say your amazing theory, my theory is that he hopes that other people will pit because they know he's going to pit.
And they want the undercut.
And then they think that they're just going to get the undercut because he keeps going out, and they're like, they were definitely going to get the undercut. But he never pits and keeps complaining. In
Monaco, you tend to get an overcut, not an undercut. And the other thing is, everyone knows in Monaco, track position is king. It's exactly why Ricciardo and Magnussen shouldn't have pitted. Their tyres were doing fine. They should have just stayed out there.
But it was a safety car. It was a free pit stop.
It wasn't a free pit stop because it put you out behind everyone else. And then if they run slow to preserve their tyres, you're done.
They should have known. But I would have done the same thing if I were them.
It's interesting. I guess it's hard to say, isn't it, in the heat of the moment. But my theory is that Hamilton does this. So at the end of the race, he goes, wow, I'm the best driver in the world because those tyres were so dead and look how wonderful I am.
That could be the same thing. But his tyres didn't look that bad, though. They went
through a phase of looking pretty bad.
A great driver and all. He's not even known for being good on bad tyres. He's not really known for that at all, actually. So he could have just had really bad tyres. But could he have really bad tyres for 30 laps, though?
Yeah, exactly. Well, look, Daniel Ricciardo drove a race last year with 160 horsepower down on Sebastian Vettel behind him and kept him behind the whole race.
That's a lesson on how hard it is.
The thing that was good for Lewis, though, is his rear tyres were good. So out of all of the major traction zones, he would, particularly out of that last corner before the tunnel, which has a name that I forget, let's call it La Fou de Foufou corner, because it'll be something French. Le Portier, maybe? Maybe it's Le Portier.
That's the one.
Just Portier, probably.
Yeah.
Because it's at the port, I assume.
Yeah.
So you turn right there and you're about to head into the tunnel. And that's the point, obviously, at the end of the tunnel, you come down the hill to the Nouveau chicane, and that's an overtaking zone.
It's also a fun fact, the point where Jenson Button flipped the line in 2017.
Yeah, that's right. That was a cool crash. No, if a crash can be cool, it was spectacular.
So
we saw then Max Verstappen, and maybe the reason he was complaining was to have this happen. Then we see Max Verstappen go, I'm going to do it. I'm going to have to overtake him. And of course, it became necessary for Max to try to do this because he got a 5-second penalty for the unsafe release into Bottas.
As you may or may not have heard, I mentioned very quietly, but Dad cut me off earlier in the podcast.
Oh, I apologize.
Shame on you.
I apologize. And so Max got that 5-second time penalty. So he knew at this point you've got a train at the front with Lewis, Max, Verstappen, and then Bottas. And obviously they're all within 5 seconds. So Max knows now if he doesn't get in front of Lewis and break a gap up, then he's going to come fourth,
so
which is what he did in the end.
More or less.
So, so he is on the hunt. You hear at one point Max's engineer, who I think is called GP or something
whatever
like that.
Whatever his name is,
he says to him, hey, Max, you've got the 5-second penalty. You can try to overtake Lewis if you want to come first, and you've now got mode 7, which you assume is an extra power mode, for the rest of the race. And so Max really attacks hard,
he
only had one shot at
0.5 seconds.
Yeah, and he really only had one shot at it. He made one hard-charging move into the Nouveau chicane.
The hairpin.
Didn't quite have it, and there was a little bit of contact, and Lewis went on, and Max didn't get him.
And then Vettel started having looks because of this battle.
But Vettel was overheating, so every time Vettel got behind Verstappen, his car would get hot and he'd have to back up.
Yeah.
And Bottas didn't try to have a go at Vettel. Vettel wasn't really having a go at Max. So Max is having a great season. You got to say it. He is on top form, not really making mistakes, pushing hard, gave us an interesting
Pierre
race.
Gasly is making him look good, though.
Yeah. So meanwhile, in behind all of that, through Pierre Gasly had got in front, as had Carlos Sainz. Kvyat Albon had got in front of Ricciardo and Magnussen because of the pit stop situation we described earlier. Also, in the background, Oscar, can I just call out you know, what do you say? Williams, slow. Williams, slow. 15th for George Russell.
You said earlier that track position is
in front of a Racing Point and both Alphas.
They're still slow.
And, of course, his teammate.
Don't ruin my thing.
Yeah, but pretty good outcome. You got to be, you know, George Russell, I think he said afterwards, he really tried to treat it like practice for racing with people because it's about the only time he's actually had to race people this time away.
Williams.
Yeah. But Lando Norris finished just outside of the points because of basically that earlier thing he did for Carlos Sainz. Now, I just want to say, Oscar, you said luck for Carlos Sainz. And
it was. That's what you said.
Yeah, I know. But I've been thinking about this a little bit, and I want to say it's McLaren just doing strategy right. So it was in, what was it, China or whatever, when Renault put Ricciardo out onto the hards. Remember Ricciardo had been behind Sainz the whole race?
Yes.
This was actually Spain, wasn't it? Yeah. And so Ricciardo was behind him the whole race and then finally overtakes them. Then they both pit. They put Ricciardo on the hard tyres. They put Sainz on the mediums probably. And then, of course, Sainz then overtakes him. Then a safety car came out and Sainz got the benefit of that because he was in front. Ends up way up in the points and Ricciardo wherever he was, out of the points, I think, right?
Yes.
This race was very similar. So because they decided to pit Ricciardo and they didn't decide to pit Sainz ends up best of the rest down there in P6, exactly where Ricciardo would have finished probably P5 had they not pitted him because he would have been in front of Gasly. Gasly wouldn't have got through the traffic. Gasly only ended up there by want of his qualifying position and that and not pitting under the safety car. Oh, and he did do a glory run of getting the fastest lap right at the end, didn't he?
He always does that.
Yeah, well, that's because he's always far enough in front of the best of the rest, but also a long way behind the best. So what's he if he's not the best of the rest? Then he's not the best.
He's Formula. They say the best of the rest.
He's the rest of the best.
They say the Formula the midfield to Formula 1 is Formula 1.5, right? The
That's
Williams
right.
are somewhere around Formula 3 level, and the top field are actually Formula 1. I guess he must be like Formula 1.25 or something.
1 1/4, Formula 1 1/4, something like that. But yeah, so look, Carlos Sainz, you know, he was driving well all weekend, and McLaren, you've just got to say McLaren's strategy's been pretty on point, and they've been impressive. I said in one of our earlier podcasts, I think Renault and McLaren both have promising pace. I stand by that. I think that's still very true.
And now that they're turning their engine up, apparently.
Well, and if the Renault engine really is going to be turned up in Canada, we shall see. Then, you know, let's keep our fingers crossed that maybe they can start to get ahead.
Work. He got a great result in China, even if his engine was turned down.
Yeah? Who's that?
Ricciardo.
Yeah, but he was a long, long way off the people in front of him, remember? Yeah. So, a long way off. So, and then, of course, an interesting end of the race. You and I watched this with great intent. Romain Grosjean gets a 10-second penalty. Remind me what that was for?
5 seconds, but...
5 seconds, you're correct. What was that for in the end?
I think it was leaving the track and gaining an advantage.
Oh, no, he crossed the line at exiting the pits, didn't he? Yeah, that's a weird one, but he crossed the lines. So this is kind of interesting. And Giovinazzi got a 10-second penalty for causing an incident. Now, this is interesting. Many people thought the 5-second penalty for Verstappen was a bit light on, a little bit lenient. And I'd probably tend to agree with that for an unsafe release. Giovinazzi then, in just a slightly clumsy overtake, got a 10-second penalty.
Well, Grosjean, he kind of ran... Someone ran over his front wing because of it, right?
I think so.
It was a Williams, right?
Yeah. So, yes, I think you're right. So then we see Grosjean gets this 5-second penalty. He, at the time, was 14 seconds ahead of Ricciardo?
44 seconds ahead of Ricciardo.
No, he didn't make up 44 seconds. I think it was 14.
But, But when he got the penalty, it was sometime closer. But just after the whole pitting thing and everything was sorted out, it was 44 seconds.
Oh, yeah. And then they were catching up.
Ricciardo was catching
But then at this point, I think he got told he had a penalty. It was about 14 seconds behind. By the time he got told the penalty, pardon?
All the fours.
And then Ricciardo puts his foot down. And even the commentators at the time, I think Martin Brundle said, oh, yeah, that's not going to matter to Grosjean because he's so far ahead. And you and I said to each other, no, watch out. I think Ricciardo had just got clear air and put his pedal down. And this is what showed some of the pace. I think he ended up with the fourth fastest lap
and
of
it was
the race.
his PBs.
Yeah, and he was setting PBs on these old medium tyres. So keep in mind, he went from the soft to the medium. The same tyres, I should point out, that our old mate Lewis Hamilton is complaining about the whole race. And then Daniel Ricciardo proceeds to catch up and close within 4.9 seconds of Romain Grosjean, and therefore steal away P9, which
pretty good.
Is just the littlest bit of happiness in an otherwise pretty challenging weekend. So
let's do a quick happy sad round.
Okay, have to be quick.
Thank you. So for all of you who don't know, happy sad is when we go through and rate if the drivers would be happy or sad with their results.
You want to do bottom to top, top to bottom? How do you want to do it?
Bottom to top, as usual.
Bottom to top. Okay, we're starting at the back end. Charles Leclerc.
Sad!
Furious would be the
Very
right word
angry.
for it. He can I just add to that? We'll talk about it next time. He must be at the point where he's a bit over all this Ferrari malarkey. He has been getting the raw end of the stick of every decision they make. But anyway, enough about that.
Okay, Giovinazzi's sad. Yeah, pretty quick. That's obvious.
Yeah.
10-second time
Kubica?
penalty.
Anything for Kubica?
He's probably pretty happy, actually.
Oh, no, he keeps getting owned by his teammate.
He beat Giovinazzi, though. I'd say happy. He didn't come last.
Yeah, hey, that's a good point. Kimi Räikkönen, sad. They were slow. The Alphas had very little pace this weekend, particularly after practice.
Stroll is sad.
Racing
points are doing pretty
Stroll's
terribly
been
this
nowhere.
season.
George Russell, I would say, quite happy. In fact, he looked quite happy. Best result of the season, and on merit, you know, frankly. So P15.
He's a good driver.
I think he's doing a great job, George Russell, in a really ordinary package. K-Mag, sad. This is a guy that qualified 5th and ended up finishing
Ricciardo
14th.
got the better end of that deal, actually.
Yeah, he did. Nico Hülkenberg, pretty disappointed. Not much of a weekend for him.
He never really had a good chance.
Yeah, nothing really happened.
He's not that sad.
Checo,
Sergio Perez is
sad. Disappointed as well, though.
Racing Points is pretty terrible.
The Racing Point had that big upgrade package in Spain. It's clearly not working for them. That's a shame. Lando, I think, is... Oh, my phone's talking to me again. It's not Max Verstappen on Team Radio this time, though. Lando is... he did the team proud. I think he played the team role to maximise points for the team.
He's sad himself.
He'd be a little disappointed with the weekend, but not super sad. Romain Grosjean, I would say, given the pace Haas was showing earlier on, pretty disappointed. He'll be happy to get a point and to have beat K-Mag, frankly. Yeah. So that
he'd be sad that
Daniel Ricciardo, frustrated, I would say.
Sad but happy that he beat Grosjean.
Yeah, happy that he beat Grosjean, that he got a couple of points in the end. But so much, they should have been in P5 or 6 and could have got a huge haul of points, and it would have really helped out Renault's
Albon is happy
campaign.
and Toro Rosso is happy.
Albon and Kvyat will be happy-ish. I think Albon and Kvyat both showed some real flashes of speed, but 7 and 8 double points finish. Yeah, pretty happy, I would say, at the Toro Rosso.
Sainz is
delighted.
Happy and
Carlos
lucky.
Sainz is delighted. Pierre Gasly
is happy.
Is he?
He got the fastest lap.
Because he was so far off the leaders that he couldn't catch them, and he wasn't that fast even when he bolted on the soft side, I don't think. It was used, to be fair. But Max Verstappen...
He had potential.
He got that penalty, but... happy with his pace. Everyone's talking about what a great season Max is having. He's not now third in the championship. Seb Vettel is, but he's right up there with the Ferraris in frankly a package that isn't quite as good as the Ferraris, I'd argue.
Bottas is sad.
Bottas would be a bit disappointed.
He had the potential for a first.
Yeah, a bit disappointed, and I hope he can come back punchy in Canada. Lewis is typically really good in Canada.
That's a shame.
So let's see if Bottas can come back.
Seb Vet is
happy. I'd say. Best result of the season.
Didn't expect second.
Yeah, he'd be very happy to have a second out of
Lewis
that race.
Hamilton, and we already
Lewis
told you what he is.
was delighted. You saw him jump on the fence.
Yeah. Even for
Ninja
and that was qualifying.
No, that was at the end of the race. He jumped on the fence.
I'm pretty sure.
No, it was at the end of the race. He was happy at the end. Maybe you're right, Oscar. Yeah, you could be right. Yeah, no, I should listen to you more often. That's what our listeners say. Okay.
Is that when have we heard something from our listeners?
That's right. All the enormous feedback. All right. Well, Oscar, I thought it was a great race. Really interesting, and looking forward to Canada in a couple of weeks' time.
And
Formula One Fan Festival is also that weekend here in Chicago on June 8th. Formula One and Son will be there doing some live recording. So look forward to hearing some of our thoughts on what we saw there.
if we can, and there's a lot of anticipation to the Canadian Grand Prix, and we didn't get time today, we might do a short episode of like predictions. Maybe,
yeah, well, we might do a wrap from the Formula One Fan Fest on the Saturday and a prediction.
Add predictions and
sounds good. Good. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Formula One and Son
and Reddit.
On Reddit, we're
not at without the at.
Yeah, we'll just the username is Formula One and Son if you want to reach out to us there. Otherwise, thank you for listening. Please,
and if you have comments for us, we haven't set up a Gmail yet, but I'm trying to force my dad into doing it.
And of course, please like this episode or rate it 5 stars on whatever podcast app you're listening to, and tell your friends about it. Spread the word. We'd appreciate it. That's it from Formula One
and Son.